Hey guys, what's up? Nick here once again, and today I'm here to answer another question from the community. This question comes in from Lost Angle 117, and they ask, what makes older games more enjoyable than newer games? This is a very good question, and this is something that I try to talk about almost all the time in my live streams, and I've brought it up a few times in previous videos, but I don't know if there is one specific reason as to why so many people, including myself of course, have come back to actually enjoying retro gaming more than current AAA titles or just current gaming in general. Do I think that there's no good games at all anymore? No, not at all. There's definitely a lot of hit or miss. You know, there's some really, really good ones that come out every now and then, and I have an absolute blast with them. But then I get kind of bored and I fall off and I don't really touch it for a long time, maybe in a year or so. But other than that, it's very rare. It is rare these days where a new game comes out and I'm super duper excited for it and I just end up getting addicted to it and I play it over and over again. That just doesn't happen as much as it used to back in the day. I can't tell you how many times I used to watch E3 growing up and there'd be so many games presented or announced or kind of hinted at that I was so stoked about as a kid to go to GameStop the midnight release it came out and to pick it up and play it as soon as possible. It's kind of weird, you know, thinking about it, how much stuff has kind of come and gone in the world of gaming in the past 20 years. That right there is a good example. There really is no midnight release anymore. You don't see a group of people going to a store and camping out overnight waiting for a brand new game. You might see it for a new console launch, but even then, most people are just ordering stuff online nowadays. And when it comes to gaming and new consoles, everything's going to a digital market. They're no longer promoting any physical media, and it's sort of going to the wayside, and it is very sad to think about. And I know some people can definitely make the argument that there is still physical media and it's your choice to buy digital, but the fact of the matter is, most physical media that comes out today, that disc essentially is just a key. It doesn't really have much data on it anymore. 90% of the game that you're buying, you have to download on a day one patch anyway. So you put the disc in your system, yeah, it allows you to play the game, sure. But does that disc have all the data on it that you need to play the game if you have no internet? Nope. And who's to say that in the future they turn off the ability to download that day one patch, so if God forbid you reset your console or had to buy a new one, that physical media that is so precious to people is now obsolete due to this new digital centric world. And I think that's scary for a lot of people, especially millennials and especially people like me who grew up around this kind of conversion era of going from physical media now to fully digital media. You know, when streaming became a thing, that was super cool and all the hype, but now it's literally all we have. I miss the days of going to Blockbuster and renting out a DVD for a week and being able to watch it with some friends and then bring it back. Now you have what's on streaming platforms or what you can rent digitally for a day or so, and the prices have just gone up to make it more convenient. And you know, yeah, obviously there's a lot of nice things, the conveniency and all that good stuff, but when it comes down to brass tacks, I personally would rather have a physical copy of something that I know that I own. I put my hard-earned money into it, and I would like to be able to use it whenever I want. And with today's digital media, you just don't have that luxury anymore. Again, it's more convenient, sure, but what if one day they don't allow you to download that game anymore? It's nowhere to be found, and you don't have a say. Yeah, you technically purchased, in quotations, that game, but you don't technically own it. You don't own the license. All you own is a key to access that game. And that key, sometimes at some point in the future, might become obsolete and there's no actual product to unlock. So yeah, all around, I think that's one big glaring issue right now in the state of gaming, and a reason why a lot of people, including myself, are more so going back to the glory days, you know, just playing old stuff that we loved as a kid. And that's another big part of it too, obviously, is the nostalgia factor. It's not really to try to escape the world we are in now, but it's just to kind of pay homage to games that we maybe didn't give as much credit as we deserved to back in the day. You go back and play these old PlayStation 1 titles or SNES titles or Sega Genesis titles or whatever, and yeah, like the graphics are dated, some of the gameplay elements of course are dated at this point, controls can be dated, but you still have to give it credit where credit is due, and to see that I think a lot of the limitations of consoles back then forced developers to be more creative than ever, especially when it came to crunch times. I can't tell you how many developers I've talked to over the past few years that have told me about working on games back in the 90s and the early 2000s and how much crunch was a huge limiting factor in their games development. They were brought into the studio, told you have 9 months to make this game from scratch, get to work. And yeah, you could argue that made the game worse because it was rushed and it didn't get the love and care it rightfully deserved, for sure. But I also could probably make an argument that it forced the developers to be more creative, and some things actually came out of it that were positive that would have never happened if they were given 10 years, for instance, to make that game. It is kind of interesting to look at it in different perspectives in that way, and I just don't think developers nowadays really have to deal with any of that because of this new digital-centric world. And it's also interesting to know that back then, when you released a game, that was the game. Like, it was said and done. If it's out on a disc, on a physical media, you put it in your console and that's what you have. There was no DLCs, there was no day one patches to fix issues. There was nothing of that. So developers, again, were kind of forced to be as thorough and, again, creative as possible before the game launched because that was their game. But nowadays, you have the luxury of early access titles to allow your players to basically buy the game early, but at the cost of, being an unfinished product, and then they can give their word to tell you what's broken and what needs fixes. And as a developer, you can choose to listen or ignore that, which is kind of interesting. So early access has become a big thing that is also kind of scary to me. You have games that aren't in early access, they launch at full price, but they're still unfinished. Like, they clear as day were rushed out the door for some weird reason. And the only reason I can ever come to a logical conclusion of is that they know at any moment they could upload some type of fix, some type of update, and fix the issues, and people just seem to forget. And I think that's really scary and sad because so many games nowadays, especially PC ports of these games, they get launched at just the worst, most unplayable states where you're kind of forced as a buyer to give the game like a month or two to actually pick it up and purchase it before playing it. You just can't pre-order games anymore. You can't buy them on day one launch because they're just not finished. And it's sad, man. I don't know if it's really just developers getting lazy or if it's publishers getting lazy. I think it might be a mix. I think a lot of it has to do with publishers forcing the developers to have a specific date in mind to release the game. And whether the game is done or not, they want it launched and then they can always fix it later. And again, it's just a band-aid over the major problem that will never truly be fixed, unless we go back in time. And yeah, so nostalgia clearly is a part of why older games feel a lot better than newer games, I should say. But I think the biggest thing, like I stated, is just the fact that you own this game, you have this game, it's not going anywhere. And on top of that, it was a finished product. There was no DLCs, there was no updates that changed the game over time. It is what it is. So going to an old game that came out in 1997 is going to be that full game that you played back in 1997. And there's something special about that. There really is. And I've always loved that about retro gaming. And that's why it always will have a special place in my heart and why I want my channel to always center around retro gaming and these type of games. And it's also kind of crazy to think that technically even the PS3 era, Xbox 360 era is under retro now. And that blows my mind. But it's just the way of the future, man. Every year that passes, all these new systems get older and older, and these games that we've grown up and played with get older and older, and we as humans get older and older. And I think that adds more validity to why retro gaming is so special and important, and it's becoming such a big topic as of now. And that's not even really getting into the whole nostalgia bait part of it. Some people argue like you're only into it because of nostalgia and you miss the good old days. Like, obviously that is a part of it. And I think today's media industry is really homing in on that nostalgia bait mindset. I think movies and television shows are the biggest culprit of this. So many remakes happening on stuff that does not need to be made. Disney, I'm looking at you with your live action remakes. They don't need to be made for some reason. They are, and they are making money. They're working, so obviously they're going to keep doing it. Remakes out the wazoo have been going crazy, and sometimes remakes can be good. They can fix the problems of the original game and add on to it and expand upon it. One good example is the Resident Evil series. I feel most of the remakes, except Resident Evil 3, were really well done, and they added more to the game that the original couldn't have at the time because of limitations, and I love that for Resident Evil. I love that for games that I adore. But there's also remakes that come out that really just feel like blatant cash grabs. The quote-unquote definitive edition of Grand Theft Auto Trilogy is a really good example of that, where that was clear as day, shoehorned and thrown out there at little to no cost, hoping to rake in millions of dollars, and it probably did make millions of dollars for all I know. And it's kind of crazy to think that, you know, these remakes can put little to no effort in and they still make millions of dollars, and it's just for the nostalgia bait. There's really no other reason for it. My personal outlook on remakes and like, are they worth it? Should you buy into remakes? Is if it's a game or a movie or something like that that you're really passionate about, and you feel that the director, the publisher, the developer, whatever the medium is, if you feel they are actually putting in love and care into making something new out of this remake, then by all means, support it. Give it a try. Maybe they're trying to put a whole new vision, a whole new twist on it, or maybe the original wasn't their original vision, and then again, the limitations at the time period it came out forced the hand of them, of their creative mindset or their output, whatever the case may be. So if they're able to do it now in a new light with new technology and new budget, yeah, by all means, give them the chance. Let them cook. But if it's obviously a plain as day cash grab, if it's not really a remake, it's more of a remaster, like just an upscale, you know, newer age game that's, I guess another way to describe this as well is if that older title is very easily accessible to this day, like if they already created a PC port, for instance, and they put it on Steam, and it's been available for years and it runs fine, and they're making a quote-unquote remake, selling it at full price, but there's really nothing different about it, what's the point? You know, that to me is a cash grab. That to me is stay away. Another good example was the Battlefront remake, or whatever you call it. They were doing this big marketing campaign for this Battlefront remake of remaking and putting in a bundle of Battlefront 1 and 2 on Steam, on PC. It might have come out for console as well. I could be wrong about that. I don't remember. But when that launched, it was in just an unplayable state. Graphically, it looked not much better than the original that was, again, still available on Steam and runs just fine with multiplayer, and for way cheaper. This remake, quote-unquote, was like $40, and the servers were terrible, and the game didn't look that great, and it was like 80 gigs in size. The original was only $5. It was maybe 5 gigabytes in size, still ran great, looked great, and still had an online community. So you look at that, and you're like, why would you buy the remake when the original is easily accessible right there? But then on the flip side, of course, you have games where they really aren't accessible. Like, they're literally abandonware, where there's really no way to play them unless you have that specific console from back in the day, and a lot of people just can't get their hands on that stuff anymore, or of course the physical disc. And that's where emulation comes into play, and why I'm a huge advocate for emulation and for using ROMs and all that stuff, because it's just preservation of that game. So again, if it's a game that's not readily available, I think a remake or remaster or whatever is just fine, and definitely understandable to get more people to be able to play that game. I think that's great. It really just comes down to your own personal opinion on that kind of stuff. You know, what makes older games more enjoyable than newer games? I think the biggest thing is, yes, nostalgia is a huge factor, but I really do think it's just the fact that newer games rely so heavily on internet connection, on updates. It doesn't need to be. You know, microtransactions are one thing, that's a whole different story, but if your game comes out, and it's not multiplayer focused, by the way, I'm only talking about single player at this point. If your game comes out and it's single player focused, that should never, ever need an internet connection. I am sorry. If it's a single player game, it should be done before release. You should never have to have a day one patch. You shouldn't have to update it. You shouldn't have to do anything. And of course, it should never have to have a live service, like live updating world in a single player setting. That just doesn't make sense to me, and it never will. I just think it's a way for developers to screw over the consumers and one day have them install a patch that bricks the game and have to rebuy it again or whatever. I don't know what it is. That's a conspiracy, obviously, but it is a thought in the back of my mind. Now, if your game is multiplayer focused, that has nothing to do with that, because obviously you need internet for that, and that makes sense. So yeah, newer games, not as good as the retro ones in my opinion. I will always come back and play these guys because they are the bread and butter of this channel, of my community, and of my soul, you know, my own being. I love these games, I always will. So thank you again, Lost Angle, for your question. If you guys have any questions that you would like me to answer in a future video like this, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to show it and give you a shout out and all that stuff. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like to show your support as always. Subscribe so don't miss the next one. Hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out, everyone.